Did she make the shirts or did you?
We made them together. Chocolate. Gotta love it.
Hello and welcome to One North Main.
Good afternoon. Once again, I'm Pastor Jeff Johnson here at First Lutheran, and welcome to the 37th season of the Lenten Luncheon series. A year ago, in April, the former administrator here at First Lutheran, Jim Benson, unfortunately died very suddenly, and we are still mourning that loss around that man and his ministry. And this event was largely due to Jim, and he customized it and invited the speakers. So I have taken over that for this year along with the staff. So please give us a birth of forgiveness if we do something that Jim did not, that Jim did sort of, innately. Finally, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, and Dr. Joao Rosa with the Bridgewater State University.
When I was young, I attended a private school, not for formal education, but for some extracurricular activities, that was located right here on Warren Avenue. And I could decode English because I could speak Portuguese, I could read and write French. So I could decode English, but I didn't really understand English. And every day I would go into a room, I would see on the wall a quote by Henry David Thoreau. And the quote was fairly simple, and I read it so many times that I ended up memorizing the quote. And it basically said this: if a man walks to the beat of a different drum, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. And of course I could read this thing, but I never really understood, the significance of it. And I think to a huge extent, what we do at the Institute is essentially that. We try to document the journey of Cape Verdeans to this region. Most people, of course, the city of Brockton is very diverse. At least as far as we know, there are about some 33,000 Cape Verdeans in Brockton. There are about some 33,000. I mean, if you look at any hallway in the school systems, if you walk through any hallway in the school systems, this will be immediately visible to you. But there isn't much understanding about Cape Verdeans. We know that the Cape Verdeans exist here, but we don't really have a sort of a historical understanding of Cape Verdeans. And this can be illustrated very easily. The first documented Cape Verdean to come to the US, I asked this question the other day of someone. They said, well, it was probably in the early 1900s, In actuality, it was in 1638. 1638. I mean, think about this thing. 1638. 18 years after the Pilgrims landed, right? According to historical record. Matias de Souza landed. He was an indentured servant for a Jesuit missionary. And he was in the state of Maryland, right? The territory of Maryland in 1638, earned his freedom in 1641. 1642, he was elected to a local assembly. 1642. That to me is astonishing. In 1850, the first person of color, other than the Native Americans, in Seattle was a Cape Verdean. In 1850. His name was Manuel Lopes, owned a barber shop. The first person of color in Seattle. Again, to me that's amazing. That's positively amazing. That the history goes back so far. If you know anything about the history of the region, which I assume everyone here knows, twice in the history of the world, New Bedford has been the richest city per capita in the world, twice. Once through the whaling era, once when whaling was the main industry, and again through the textiles. So 2 times in the history of the world, New Bedford has been the richest city per capita in the world. Cape Verdeans had a lot to do with this thing. If you read Melville actually has instances in Billy Budd that he talks about a seaman on board of the boat who was actually of Cape Verdean descent. So Cape Verdeans have been around for a long time, and they have served in every possible sector, every sphere of life that you can think of. So, for example, you have records of Cape Verdeans serving in the military in the Revolutionary War. Now, if you talk to most people about this in Brockton, there isn't a historical understanding, right? There isn't an understanding of the historical trajectory of Cape Verdeans in the region.
And went to Virginia. There's 2 other pastors at my church doing what they did, and we were there just relaxing, being still, knowing that God was God. And my wife woke up probably halfway through the week and said, "We need to move to New England." And I said, "What states are in New England? Like, really? I think we've been there once. We went to Bar Harbor once, years ago. Like, why?" And she said, "I have no idea, but we just have to move there. Call the bishop." I was like, "Oh, I have to find out who the bishop is in New England." I knew nothing about that. So in Minnesota, 1 out of 4 people is Lutheran. In New England, 1 out of 200 people is Lutheran. It's very different culture and climate. When we came, we noticed basically everybody was Catholic, Congregationalist, or atheist. That was the population. And but Margaret Payne said, "We've got this perfect church in Quincy." And I said, "All right, I've figured out now New England is 6 states. Which state is that one in?" She said, "Oh, it's just south of Boston. John Quincy Adams lived there. Is this ringing a bell?" I said, "No, but I'll check it out when we get there." So we relocated. Took about 6 months with the call process, and we arrived. We had, over a course of 4.5 years, packaged enough of these meals, and if you can see the one that says fortified rice and bean meal, it's kind of the brownish one. This was the only meal there was except no pinto beans, so it was just a really bland rice-based meal with protein and vitamins and minerals. But we had done enough to feed 1 million people, but everybody we fed was overseas. It was in East Africa or somewhere where they had an overseas connection. Well, we moved here, and the very next day the Haiti earthquake happened. And that year, the outreach program gave Haiti 50 million meals. It was huge. And we started packaging meals with them. I had worked with somebody else in the Midwest, but they said, our reach just is the biggest group who does this is called the outreach program. I will connect you to Floyd and Kathy, and you can do meals there too, but we just can't. I'll send you with one assembly line. So we started feeding 200 orphans in Haiti right away. Well then, fast forward a year and a half, and our social ministry chair said, aren't there hungry kids in Quincy? Like, I bet you there's some kids in Quincy that would eat this meal because they're hungry. Well, we had Synod Assembly that June, and we had been working for a year on trying to figure out what the point of being Lutheran was in New England, because there's so few of us. And we came up with a purpose statement that was to go where love leads, and we're like, we moved here. Serve where love calls, and I was like, we have been packaging these meals, and I just found out this very weekend that 1 out of 4 American kids is going to bed hungry. And 1 out of 3 kids in Maine. It was ridiculous. And I found out that at the time we had the most hungry people we will hopefully ever have on the planet. It was 1 billion, but there were 7 billion people on the planet at the time. So it was 1 out of 7 on our globe was hungry, but 1 out of 3 kids in Maine. So we just shifted. We're Vikings fans, so we punt a lot. I don't know if that doesn't happen with the Patriots, but we just said, you know what, these 3 master's degrees, we'll just kind of, Heidi couldn't find a teaching job. Then the 18 months we were here, and she had a master's degree. So in Massachusetts, you have to have one to be a teacher for more than 5 years. And it just wasn't happening. So she had started writing. So over in the other room, I've got some examples of hers, but Jeff was kind enough at Calumet to do a summer book study, and we still get great feedback from people about that, how they experienced that. But she's written a children's book now and a novel, and she's working on her second novel. The neat thing is all the proceeds from these go to feed more hungry kids. So Heidi's fed about 250,000 hungry people already. At the very beginning, this little girl named Lucy, I also have some of her CDs over there, did a project with us, and she's fed over 1 million. She's 14 years old now. But she is a daughter of a friend of mine from high school and college. And everybody, as this thing started to emerge, was doing what they could do to make it happen. You guys have had the largest food pantry on the South Shore for many, many years. And so right away, we did a little tiny event at one of your huge meal events. It was in the fall, I can't remember what it was, but it was a lot of food. And we were in the food pantry, just showing people kind of how this meal packaging thing works. So this church, all these churches within our conference, a bunch of Lutherans and Methodists and Congregationalists, and some atheist humanists at Harvard, got this thing rolling, and it went from those 4 groups to 82 different kind of groups now. The neat thing is we've fed 27.5 million people, but Lutherans have fed 10 million of those people. Just on Martin Luther King, we hit that. So you can imagine 81 different kind of groups have done 17.5 million, and Lutherans have done 10 million. And there's not very many Lutherans here. That's the whole point. But they just jumped on board. If they had a food pantry, they started taking the meals to hand them out. We had just this one, and then if you have one of the mac and cheese ones, it's the yellow one. We just had those 2 kinds. Because when I found out at Synod Assembly, I was supposed to go where love leads and serve where love calls, and that 1 out of 4 American kids was going to bed hungry, I called who became my boss, I called Floyd up and said, do you ever feed hungry people like in America? And he said, you know, the interesting thing is we just met with all of the leadership we've ever had part of this organization. It's kind of a small group, but we said we're going to do a couple things. We're going to create a domestic meal with our international meal, just put pinto beans in it, and we're going to do a mac and cheese. It's going to be an easy mac. And we think those meals would go locally, so we're going to start packaging those. But we wanted someone to try this out somewhere we've never been in the country. We want like a guinea pig to be a regional person, not like in our home office in Iowa, but like a regional somewhere. But there's really only one part of the country where we've never done one of these events before. Where do you live? And I said, we live on South Shore of Boston. He's like, we've never packaged a meal in the Northeast before. Do you want to give this a shot? I was like, go where love leads, serve where love calls. Sure.
What's going on in Brockton right now? Okay, never before have the house's values been so high. So hence, that makes your property taxes go up. A little general simplification. Why is this happening? For 2 reasons. Well, because they cost way more the further north you go and the further west you go. So now we're receiving the ramifications. 2, at this certain stages in the history of the universe, there's peaks and valleys, and right now a ton of people want to buy houses. So if you want to sell yours, good move right now. But you need to realize that, yes, you will get a whole lot for it, but I won't lie to you, it might cost a lot somewhere else to find a place to live. That's a really good thing for Brockton. What's a little challenging, and this is all over the state, is the situation of affordable housing. Because many senior citizens are on a fixed income, and many young families tight squeeze right now. Affordable housing means that you're working, or you're receiving benefits, or you're retired, and you're receiving, what you're due, certainly from your pension or, 401, etc. And you want to live somewhere, and how would I say it, be in a viable community. Brockton has more affordable housing than any other community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Okay, this is good for the people living there in the affordable housing. Not good for the people that own their own homes. And that's also a squeeze too. So if people hear me say, no more affordable housing for Brockton unless there's already a contract signed, I'm going to stick with that because it's not fair to the current homeowners. We want our schools to be the best because our kids are the best, and you just talked about how you're going to have this great principal here next week, and she could tell you that why you want the best for your students, because a community with great schools is a great community for everyone, okay? And last but not least, infrastructure. Now, infrastructure is not glamorous, but boy, are we not giving it up anytime soon. That means indoor plumbing, and that also means roads, bridges, etc. And there's been and because we live in the Northeast, they get walloped more so than if we lived, down in, southern Florida or something. So that's what we need to concentrate on, and we need the revenue in our city, and that's why you will hear me chant repeatedly, no more affordable housing for Brockton. We want market rate and we want luxury, okay? But we're not really pushing for a ton of housing either, because we want other things. So that brings me back to yesterday. There was a groundbreaking for the first of luxury apartments in decades. We're pretty excited about that. They took a building that needed to be, unfortunately, demolished because of its neglect, and had been in a fire. We were looking at, what, like 11 years ago or something? And they took care of it. So we're going to see this. Yes, luxury apartment, high-end market rate, in downtown Brockton. And what people need to realize is this can happen, and so can a lot of other good things, okay? So that's one of the things I want to highlight. I am adamant about keeping our history and highlighting it, which leads me to two things. One, we have a historic commission, and we're trying to get members on it or people's input. Please do not hesitate to be part of any kind of board or commission, or even come to any of the meetings. They're all public, and they're all open to you, okay? The more you know, the better off you are. And the second part of this is, we're honored here in Brockton to have, and we're the only other community that has had this, is Boston. The library on Saturday, it's May 18th now, will be hosting Mass Memories. And this is huge. This is through UMass Boston. And people can come. Please do. If you lived here, you grew up here, you live here now, with your pictures, with, how would I say, artists, especially some of you that had a grandparent that worked at a company that doesn't exist anymore, because we all know we were the shoe capital of the universe, but we had a whole lot of other stuff going on. They want to keep our memories alive and bring it out to other people. And that's important, because if you can't learn your past, then you can't go forward, and you can't recognize, what's happening in your present. And there's so much great history to this city, and it's terribly exciting that we can be, part of this. And people don't realize that the guy that started Hollywood came from Brockton, and it's called Hollywood because that was his last name. And people don't realize that. People don't realize that we've had the first person to receive an honored award during World War I was a nun that came from Brockton. There's a whole lot here. I could talk to you about the Historical Society. I could talk to you about all the, the art and the monuments in this city. But, I hope that you take the chance to experience yourselves.
So a couple of things about our school. You'll notice that if you're ever in the community when students are coming and going, our students are easily recognizable with their navy blue collared shirts and khaki pants. And that's something that's unheard of really in public schools, right? You'll often question, are they part of a parochial school, or are they part of a charter? But we started some initiatives about 9 years ago under an amazing leader, June Saba McGuire, and a lot of those initiatives still ring true. And one of the things that are really important to the work that we're doing at the Gilmore that we began when we were at the Huntington is just ways to really reignite education for our urban youth here in the community of Brockton. So we recognized a couple of needs that were happening among our students, and one of that was providing them with an equal playing field, so that when they sat in a classroom and looked to the left and looked to the right, they felt included and part of an inclusive classroom. And the first thing was to break down those barriers of who had what and what their socioeconomic status was. So here, all of our students wear the same thing, and it unites us and creates a nice little community known as the Gilmore Hawks. But there's more than that. When you walk into the Gilmore School, or actually before you even walk in, you see a beautiful mural that we had painted on the side of the school. It's bright and vibrant. Laura Donato actually brought a team of high school and students from both the Southeastern Regional as well as Brockton High, and you saw them just put their passion on the side of the wall. That really replicates the history of the Campello community. It focuses on the lively education that's happening today, but also the education of the past and the fact that there has been so many people that have walked through the corner of Campello that we exist in to really bring back all of those old school values, but bringing us forward to today's values, including technology. But the one thing that has always remained very consistent is that of needing a community to bring education really alive, but also the sense of family and the sense of the history that has brought us where we are. So that's really important to us at the Gilmore. In addition to that, of course, we're focused on education, but prior to even focusing on that, the most important thing is to make sure everybody feels like they're part of something, part of a school, part of a community, and part of a family. And what we've really worked on as a school is connecting with the Campello community. So between the Campello Business Association, which includes this church as well as the Trinity Baptist, including the neighborhood associations, which where is there a neighborhood association without Lynn Smith right at the center? But Lynn has been such a big part of helping us help our students and families feel connected to the community. The Brockton Public Library has been a big part of what we do, the Old Colony YMCA and Bridgewater State University. And one thing that we recognize, and people laugh at me, mainly because hawks aren't part of a flock. I think there's something else. But I always say it takes a flock to raise a hawk. And each one of you are part of that flock, right? Connecting to the community, finding outside organizations to help support what we're doing so that school doesn't end with the bell. It extends beyond the bell. And that's the opportunities that this church provides with after-school programming and meals and shelter and different events that we get to host collaboratively, having a park nearby with green space, with the beauty that helps kids feel that they're in a place that is fun, right, and vibrant, and what kids need is a backyard to play in. So our parks and our different recreational spaces allow for that, and of course the joy of holding a book in your hand, which the library is right down the street.
First of all, I'd like to thank Pastor Jeff for this invitation. And I'd also like to thank all of the volunteers who have made today's lunch and have made the whole series such a wonderful event. And finally, I want to thank everyone here, the community that is First Evangelical Lutheran Church. Some of you may recognize me from the Campello Business Association meetings or from the Keith Park Neighborhood Association or the Frederick Douglass Neighborhood Association or outdoor movie nights or little free libraries or the fountain in Keith Park, which is now flowing for the first time in 37 years. I guess you could call me an activist, an organizer. Some people like to call me that one mosquito in the room in the middle of the night that keeps you awake all night. Annoying, but persistent. You know, persistence, every time I think of persistence in history, I think of this church. Organized in 1867, the sanctuary erected in 1922, the replacement chance organ dedicated in 1968. And contrary to popular opinion, I was alive for only one of the above. However, born in 1952, there are certain chapters of my life history that taught me lessons that shape the decisions I make today and the causes that I'm involved in today. And I'm sure it's the same for many of you in this room. So here goes, my topic for today, a sharing of life lessons learned. Life lesson number 1, when a woman buys a house and has no husband in tow, the neighborhood does not go to ruin. I moved to Brockton in 1985 and I bought my little bungalow, which was built in 1932 from a kit from Sears Roebuck. I bought that house for $82,000, a fortune, and much to the horror of my neighbors. Kenny Porter, a fireman, Al Bishop, a mechanic at Woodward Spring, Ray Lassard, an electrician, and Wally Eckberg, a man of many talents who also had dead stuffed animals in his basement. I was a single woman with no husband. The neighborhood had gone to ruin. Eddie DeGoli, who built the house, was rolling in his grave. Needless to say, I survived, the men put up with me, and the icing on the cake is today, 35 years later, my mortgage is paid in full. Lesson number 2, living as a single woman does not mean a life less lived. Now, it was not my first choice to be a single woman. I grew up the oldest of 6 children in Boston. My mom was a union teacher, my dad a union plumber. Union is the operative word here. One of my earliest memories is the ritual of pasting my dad's stamps into his membership book, proof that he had paid his monthly union dues. I went to girls' Latin school. I went there for 6 years, from grade 7 to grade 12. This was a public school, but it was an entrance exam school. 300 applicants for every 1 seat at that school. We were much smarter than our male counterparts at Boston Latin School, whose alums were folks like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Benjamin Franklin. Underachievers compared to the women of Codman Square, Dorchester, as far as we were concerned. And you know, when you're one of 6 kids, each of whom is expected to go to college, the deciding factor back in the 1970s was money. So after 6 years of an all-girl high school, I ended up going to an all-girl college, Emmanuel, conveniently located in the Fenway-Longwood area of Boston. And to the delight of my parents, I was able to commute by bus every day from my house in West Roxbury. To pay for room and board when you're the oldest of 6 kids going to college was out of the question. So we women commuter students of Emmanuel would pool our resources, and we would rent a school bus, and we would take the bus to the dances at Boston College and Holy Cross. Surely a suitable match would be found in those medieval days before eHarmony. But alas, for me, it was not meant to be. Crying to my mother one day that I was destined to wither and die on the vine, she said, "Oh, for Pete's sakes, go take a night course and see if you can find a man that might take a liking to you." So I went to Quincy Junior College, and there was one line at the registration event that was all men. Ha ha, this is the class for me, I thought with glee. 3 months later, I was standing behind home plate at my first Little League game, mask on my face, chest protector on my body, shin guards on my legs, ball and strike counter in my hand, the first woman umpire of the South Shore Baseball League.